Good evening and welcome to the second in the Special Education Legal Fund webinar series of this school year. We are here to talk about dyslexia, and I'm really looking forward to the opportunity to work with our esteemed panel. I am Laura Sullivan, and I am the staff attorney for S.E.L.F. Legal Aid, and this is my first time moderating in the webinar series, so please give me some grace, as Christine Lai, our executive director, is a pro at this, and I am not. I am a special education attorney and have a strong interest in this topic as my son has dyslexia, and I have lived this journey from the parent side. So before we get started, there's going to be some housekeeping. I do want to thank Eagle Hill School for sponsoring this webinar, as we couldn't do the work that we do without our generous sponsors. And I would like to thank all of the 2025 corporate sponsors. At the platinum level, we have Eagle Hill School and WellSpire Advisors. At the gold level is Winston Preparatory School. In our silver level is American School for the Deaf, Villa Maria School, Chapel Haven Schleifer Center, Fusion Academy, Spire School, and the Pinnacle School. And at our bronze level, our sponsor is the Windward School. So again, thank you to our corporate sponsors. Here at S.E.L.F., our mission is to provide resources and knowledge to families in need with children in the special education system. We seek to empower parents and guardians to fully advocate for their students and to level the playing field for families in need with children in special education. In 2025-26, very exciting news, S.E.L.F. will provide direct legal services to qualifying families in the area of special education for students with IEPs in Connecticut through S.E.L.F. Legal Aid. And S.E.L.F. Also provides the legal support, the grant program for legal support and advocacy to families in need with children in the special education system in Connecticut through the Attorney Grant and the Advocacy Grant programs. And for more information on those, you can visit our website at spedlegalfund.org. This graph is just, showing us a visual representation of the new S.E.L.F., which was introduced at our webinar last month. It is recorded and on the website if you want to go back and check that out. We have the new legal aid arm, staff special education attorney, which is me, providing in-house legal support. We have our attorney grant program at $6,000 per grant. We have our advocate grant at $1,500 per grant. And we have all of our parent education, including this webinar series and our resource fair, along with other things. So S.E.L.F. Legal Aid, just so you know, is currently accepting applications. The legal aid program is open to families whose income falls below 125% of the federal minimum poverty level. You have to be a resident of Connecticut and Westchester, New York, and your student has to have a current IEP. You can visit the website to begin that process. And I just want to let you know we've got a fabulous event coming up. Homecoming for S.E.L.F. is our gala, but there's a homecoming theme, which means we're dressed in alumni gear. There's food trucks and music, and we've got incredible honorees in Reverend Sean Garin and Ashley Garin. And if you would like more information or you would like to contribute anything, the website for registration is selfhomecoming.givesmart.com. And now we're moving on to the good stuff. So we really have a great panel here. I'm not going to read all of their bios because they're here. You can go in and read them, and they all have such fascinating careers that their bios are long. So I'm just going to introduce each panelist. We've got Megan Colvin from our corporate sponsor, Eagle Hill School. So thank you to them for Megan. Megan has been teaching at Eagle Hill for 10 years. In addition to teaching in the upper school and being head of tutorial department, she runs their summer program and coaches multiple sports. This is Megan's second webinar, but I did not meet her until recently. And when we spoke, I could just hear her passion and dedication to teaching, and I'm really excited to have her participate. So thank you, Megan.
Thank you.
Next up, we have attorney Jeff Forte. Jeff is back for his 7th time as a webinar panelist, which speaks to his breadth of knowledge on special education legal issues.
I'm going to get your jacket, Jeff. Don't worry.
Yeah. In November 2024, Jeff successfully litigated a due process in a dyslexia case, which not only brought a tremendous remedy to the family, but provided all of us with case law supportive of parents' rights in these cases, which is really important when we're, up against these cases. Next, we have Kristen Viesselman, I'm sorry, I say that wrong sometimes. This is Kristen's first and hopefully not last webinar. Kristen is a literacy specialist and evaluator, and we really welcome her to hopefully many more going forward. I've worked with Kristen many times, and her ability to find the nuances in a student really amazed me. And she's able to identify deficits and then provide incredibly detailed plans for remediation. And when you work with her, you just feel her joy in getting to know each and every student. So I really enjoy working with Kristen. And finally, we have Diane Willcutts. Diane is an incredible advocate. She's been an advocate for more than 20 years. And I just continue to be impressed by her breadth of knowledge and encyclopedic memory for things. Diane has a real passion for reading and dyslexia and has been a staunch advocate for children. And I'm always learning from her. She's also always learning, and she's currently working on an advanced degree in reading. So I don't know when she has the time. She doesn't stop, but thank you, Diane, for being here as well. And then one more thing before we get started, we have to do a disclaimer. So the webinar panel is for informational purposes only. It is not intended, it is intended as a resource for families who are navigating special education in Connecticut and New York, and is not intended to provide legal support, advice, or assistance to any particular individual, nor is it intended to replace the advice of counsel and counsel of a qualified special education attorney that you may retain. Families in need of legal assistance, support, or assistance should contact a special education attorney licensed to practice in Connecticut or New York to discuss their specific needs. This webinar should not be construed as an endorsement by Special Education Legal Fund or any of its representatives of any of the participating attorneys, advocates, or other professionals in the panel, nor should it be construed as an endorsement of any school or school representative invited to appear on the panel. For webinar participants, this panel should be viewed as a public forum. Please do not ask questions via the Zoom platform, either in the Q&A or in the chat about your child or your child's legal or educational situation in this forum. And please refrain from any comments that include identifiable information about your child, including name, grade, school district. Please remember that your screen name is visible to the participants in this panel, as well as the panelists and Special Education Legal Fund. The webinar is being recorded and may just be distributed or shown at a later date at the discretion of Special Education Legal Fund. So here we go. And in terms of questions, we're probably going to save the questions for the end because we really have a lot of content to get through. Christine Lai, who is here and is our esteemed executive director at S.E.L.F, will be moderating the chat. And if something is really relevant to what we are discussing, she will jump in with that question. So we're gonna jump right into it, and I'm gonna start with Kristen. So why is it that only 36% of Connecticut fourth graders can read proficiently, meaning grade level text? We're starting with an easy question, right?
Sure. I think there's a number of reasons for that, but three in particular come to mind as really, I think, key reasons for that. And one is definitely teacher knowledge. And I'm going to expand upon each of these as well. Another is just what we're using to instruct our students, whether that's in the general education setting, in intervention, or when they're receiving special education services. And then I think this also has to do with what screening measures are in place and how we're interpreting that information. So I just want to expand particularly on the teacher knowledge piece because that's my training. I went to school and received a master's in special education. And when I received my master's and I knew I was going to be teaching in a resource room in the fall, I graduated and I knew I was going to have at least 80% of my students that were going to be having difficulty with reading. And I did not feel prepared at all to teach reading. I was terrified. I had one direct reading course. I had another course that was still teaching whole language. So I really did not feel prepared at all. And so I spent the summer working for a learning center and getting specialized training in their specific programs because I wanted to be prepared to work with my students. And then when I got there, and I started talking about these programs that I had received all this training in, I was told, we don't do that research-based stuff here. So it was really, really hard. And so I feel for the teachers, I really do. I think that they're definitely doing the best that they can, but it's really important that we have educator preparation programs that are aligned with science. And we need our teachers to be prepared to teach structured literacy. This is something that is good for not only students with dyslexia, but for all students. So it's really critical that these teachers that are being trained have this knowledge base and are given those opportunities. And then I had mentioned that we really need to make sure that we're aligning our instruction with science as well. And so I think it's critical right now, more than ever, knowing these rates are as low as they are, that we are using curriculum in our general education setting that's aligned with the science of reading. We also need to make sure that if we're finding students are having difficulty and they're moving to intervention, that they're shifting still to instruction based on the science of reading. And then when they shift to special education, that instruction continues. We want to intensify the amount of instruction those students are receiving, but we still want to make sure they're getting that good, solid, structured literacy instruction based on the science of reading. And then that last piece that I was referencing, just those required screeners, it's really important that we are finding these students that are in need of this instruction as soon as possible. So not only administering these universal screeners that are now mandated in the state, but also understanding how to interpret the information that they're giving us. I think that a lot of the educators are being quickly trained in how to administer these assessments, if they're lucky, and they are not always being trained in how to interpret the information that those assessments are giving us. And that is such an important piece to all of this as well.
Thank you very much, Kristen. Kind of following that screener path, I'm going to turn to Diane and Jeff as advocates because we know that there has been a requirement for screeners to be put in place for K-3 and curriculums aligned with the science of reading. Are you seeing in your work any kind of positive impact from that at this point? Diane, can we start with you?
Sure. I would say yes. Not necessarily because the staff know how to interpret the results. Very often I find that staff don't, unfortunately. However, when the families are working with me, we can pick apart the data and ask for further assessment if needed. So one thing for families to watch out for, and these are the assessments like DIBELS or Ames Web or CBM or Cadence. Those are the mandated screeners. Every district is required to use one of those with students in kindergarten through third grade. These are typically done at least 3 times a year. If you don't get that, ask your district for it. Say, how did my child do on the K-3 screener? When you look at this, it can be a little confusing because there are lines and there are colors, like green is good, yellow is, oh, question mark, and red is, oh my goodness, we're way behind. Don't rely solely on these screeners. They are just screeners. For example, oral reading fluency, it's a 1-minute test. Some young kids can fake their way through the 1-minute test. However, it is sort of it alerts us, is there a red flag? I find if I have a student, who has trouble with nonsense word fluency or oral reading fluency, we're then saying, okay, can we do some additional testing? Like look at the phonemic awareness phonological awareness screening test, which is an informal measure. Let's see how the student's doing on phonological awareness. Let's do a core phonics. Let's see where they're breaking down. Do not let people tell you to wait. A lot of times staff will say, oh, it's kindergarten, we can't really intervene. If we get them K1, 2, they could be all set.
And I think we're going to hit on some of those points a little later. Yeah.
Okay.
So I think we're going to get to Jeff. Do you have anything quickly to add to that? Because I don't want to get stuck in any topic too long. Unfortunately, we just have limited time.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I echo what Diane says. I think it has improved the identification of students as learners, but really, I think the real test is whether the screening data is going to trigger timely evaluations under the IDEA. I'm sure that Diane and I and all of us on the panel can give, lots of examples where students that aren't responding to tier 1 or tier 2 interventions are not timely being referred for evaluations under the child find obligations under the IDEA. So I think we're still in that phase where I'm still waiting to see if it's going to increase child find obligations that districts are bound to do on a timely fashion, or if we're just going to continue to be in this response to intervention framework, which, as many parents know, SRBI interventions cannot be used as a shield to prevent a referral for special ed. So if you're finding that your learner is not responding well and closing the gap with scientific research-based interventions, or they're not responding well to these triggers and the screening evaluations alone, that in and of itself should be evidence to make the referral for special ed. And I think one of your questions gets into that. So I don't want to.
Yeah. Thank you, Jeff. Yeah. So this one, I'm going to turn to probably Megan and maybe Kristen. One thing that we hear a lot of, it's too early to identify dyslexia in your child, right? So how early can the signs be seen in kids, and how does that manifest? Megan, do you want to take this first?
Yeah, so Diane was saying, the earlier we get them, the better, which is amazing. And so we kind of feel that too. And I think one thing that's important to think about is just what is dyslexia, and that kind of helps people see some of the signs. So dyslexia is a neurological difference in the brain, and it's not correlated to intelligence. So those would be typically difficulties with sounds, which then ends up becoming compounding issues that lead to larger language challenges. So some of the typical difficulties people might see, like you were saying, difficulty with letter sounds and names. B and D reversal is typical until about age 7 or 8, and then after, it would be something that might need some more intervention. Confusion with the sequence of letters, numbers, and symbols, problems with spelling and writing. Those are more typical ones that we would see. But some kind of non-reading signs that you might see could be prevalent as early as pre-K. And so those would just be kind of difficulty in learning to speak, difficulty organizing language, so that would be written and expressive, difficulty learning a foreign language, confusion with directions, so time and space, left and right, north and south, high levels of frustration with reading or saying things like reading is boring, and difficulty retaining information. Those are all clues that are separate from the reading screeners that you can kind of see if you're a parent. That could be as early as pre-K. So really anything that you see that would be difficult for a child that involves translating listening or language to thought or thought to language would be something to take a look at and consider. I don't know if Kristen has anything else to add.
Yeah, I mean, I think those are all very important risk indicators that you just mentioned. The one thing that I would want to add to that is just also considering family history. We know that if there's dyslexia in the family, even on one side of the family, that it is, we have about a 50% 50% likelihood of that child having dyslexia. If they have a sibling with dyslexia, it's really important that we also consider that family history as well. And something as simple as, when kids are younger and they're 3 or 4 years old and you're playing rhyming games with them and they're having trouble, with their rhyming, or they're having trouble remembering the alphabet. The alphabet's such an easy way to check as students are learning when it just is not coming easily to them, and it's so hard for them to remember even though they've been exposed to it many times. Those are really important flags as well.
Thank you. That was such a comprehensive list of things to
Yeah.
look out for. So thank you. Megan, I'm going to bounce back to you. As you're in a private school that is aimed at students with language-based learning disabilities, at what point should parents consider investigating options other than the public school?
Great question. So when I just did I did the Orton Gillingham, the 70-hour training course, because I'm in the process of getting my associate level for Orton Gillingham. And one quote that really stood out to me was from Margaret Rawson and Roger Saunders, who are one of kind of the OG originals. And they said, the differences are personal, the diagnosis is clinical, the treatment is educational, and the understanding is scientific. And each of those parts kind of leads to when it would be best to kind of consider an option other than private. So the differences are personal. So each situation will be different based on the child, the family, the district, and a million other factors that, we can't all anticipate. But really kind of the way it presents in a child will be different in each case. And one piece that we really want to think about, especially, we think about this at Eagle Hill, is that whole child piece. How are they impacted from a social emotional standpoint? And how are they impacted just as a human based on these challenges that are arising? And the longer that you wait, the longer and kind of the more difficult those social emotional issues will continue to be. And that's when, as kids get older, we start to see behaviors manifest that really could be grounded in their, learning challenges, but could be displaying as behavioral type of issues. So I think just making sure that all of the differences are personal. The next thing is the diagnosis is clinical. Go to Kristen, get your really great educational assessment, because then you can move into the treatment portion. And that's really the educational piece. So I think one positive thing is that public schools are trying to implement more support for students. But really the difficulty arises when those interventions don't work after years of support. So I think a lot of parents are trying the public schools, and then we're kind of seeing on the Eagle Hill end that we're getting a lot more applicants in the older range of kids. So our, upper school, which would be middle school range, parents have tried and it's not working. And I think some of that comes to the fact that, like we were talking about, teachers might be qualified to instruct a specific reading program, but it might not work for all students. So you're really trying to fit a student into a program instead of creating a program that fits for the student. And I think that is a benefit that you do get in a private school setting, is that we are creating programs for the student. So Wilson is amazing and it teaches you that decoding piece, but there are larger language barriers that might not be directly instructed within that specific reading program that you can get at a private school that might be not happening in a public school.
Gotcha.
And then once the student does go to the Wilson or kind of their small group instruction, they still have to go back to a large classroom with grade level text that they still can't read. So kind of the amount of support that students are given in the larger classroom, even with those kind of reading skills that are supported, there's a lot more language that goes into dyslexia, and it's not only decoding. And that goes into the understanding is scientific, so the trend that we're seeing is that we're getting more older applicants. So kind of now that we know there's more to the science of reading than just the decoding piece, there's a lot more to the language. We really need to make sure that that is being instructed in all parts of the classroom instead of just a specific reading class.
And I think we're going to talk about that a little bit as we move on too, if that works.
Perfect. And yep.
Diane, I think Jeff might have mentioned SRBI, and I have a question for you. So in tiered intervention, which could be RTI, SRBI, MTSS, what should this look like in terms of service timelines and results?
Well, part of the problem is there are no specific legal requirements for tiered intervention. Different districts say you're tier 2 at a totally different stage, or you're tier 3 at a totally different stage. Sometimes tier 2 is a small group, but that small group might be 3 students. It might be 10 students. We don't know. It could be done with a reading specialist who happens to be certified in Orton Gillingham or some other structured literacy, or it could be a very nice paraprofessional who is now called the reading tutor. So we really don't know. In terms of what it should look like, it should be, I said I'm still looking for a structured literacy specialist for the tiered intervention. I'm still looking for very small groups, like no more than 3 students, and the students are at the same level, and that there's a sufficient frequency and duration of services. Someone mentioned Wilson. As you said, Wilson doesn't work for everybody. It also is a 45-minute lesson, oh, by the way, and most districts are trying to do it in 30. So the tiered intervention, usually if we're talking tiered intervention, I'm immediately asking to have the student assessed for a reading disability if the tiered intervention is for reading. I don't want to wait. A lot of times districts will say, we have to try tiered intervention first, but as Jeff mentioned, it can't be used to deny or delay an assessment. So Laura,
Yeah,
I don't
and
know
I'm going to ask Jeff about that next.
Okay.
So
justice delayed is justice denied.
yeah. So Jeff, we've heard that sometimes there's a delay in getting a
Yeah.
child evaluated. In your experience, how can parents ask for their child to be evaluated so that they have a chance of succeeding?
Sure. So parents really need to read the procedural safeguards, and it really kind of goes through the whole process. We could spend a whole webinar, 2 webinars on the procedural safeguards. And you can also Google a lot of this. There's also organizations such as S.E.L.F and S.E.L.F of Connecticut that have lots of information on this. But essentially, under the Child Find provision of the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, Child Find, in layman's terms, means that you have to find your child eligible for special ed. So you want to make your request in writing. And if you really want to get legal, you can reference 34 CFR 300-301, which is the IDEA. And then you can also reference what Diane was alluding to, the specific learning disability criteria statute, which is Connecticut State Regulation 1076D9. So you can put those 2 together in a letter, and you could state that I am requesting a comprehensive evaluation for special education services. And you'll want to list your concerns. So maybe there's test scores that are low. Maybe there's, we're just getting SBAC scores now, right? Everybody's usually not happy around this time if their child's not making progress on SBAC scores. But you'll want to give examples of reading fluency or decoding or spelling patterns that might be consistent with dyslexia. If you have any letters from medical providers or private tutors, you may want to supplement your parental written statement with a report or a finding from your provider, and invite them to PPT meetings, the PPT-1 meeting. You'll also want to reference the universal screening results and just really document everything. Another tip is many districts have on the district staff a district-wide literacy director or a literacy administrator, and they might actually be overseeing your child's SRBI by overseeing the provider of who's delivering it to your child, and you might not even be aware of that. So I will often ask the district to invite that person to the eligibility child find referral PPT as well, just to understand what they're doing. Once you do that, then the district is obligated to determine whether or not by comprehensive assessments, whether or not your child would be found eligible under the IDA within 45 school days or 60 calendar days, whichever sooner, depending on the time of year that you're making the referral.
Thanks, Jeff. And I mean, you guys are setting up like the questions like crazy. So, Kristen, here's another question where we could spend multiple webinars on. So we need to kind of limit it to, I think, the elements. But what does a comprehensive evaluation for dyslexia include? What should they be looking at? And then a specific add-on is, should a speech and language evaluation also be a part of that evaluation?
Sure. So, okay. So I think that for the comprehensive reading evaluation, you really want to make sure the evaluator is looking at all of the component parts of reading. So in 2000, the National Reading Panel came together with a scientific agreement as to what are the effective features of literacy instruction. And so we really want to make sure that at the very least, we're evaluating all of those component parts. So things like phonemic awareness, phonics, fluency, vocabulary, and comprehension. But then we also need to extend that to related skills like written expression and spelling, and sometimes phonological processing should be there too. So should there always be a speech and language evaluation in addition to a comprehensive reading evaluation? I think the answer to that is no. There doesn't always have to be, but there may be things that come up during that comprehensive reading evaluation, or even during the intake with the family or the school district, that are kind of flags or indicators that, wait a second, there should be a speech and language pathologist involved in this too. So things like if a student is having difficulty with their articulation, that's something that you really need to have a speech and language pathologist look at. If this is a child that's really having trouble with their linguistic comprehension skills, so really having trouble understanding what's being presented in the classroom, or trouble following directions, or difficulty with their verbal responses. Those are all kind of those red flags that say, you know what, I think we also need to bring a speech and language pathologist in to look at this as well. So I think it really does depend on the individual student. So I wouldn't say it has to always be that way, but there are definitely certain things that we're looking for where we want to bring that expert in to see if there's a need for some instruction from a speech and language pathologist as well, in addition to that literacy instruction. Yeah, I'm so sorry, but you asked me about those component parts, and I was talking about the National Reading Panel and making sure we include all of those. But it's also really important that we're looking at the history, so the educational history of the student. That's where I'm talking about connecting with the family and the school about what have we been doing for this child, because there are still instances where we have students, unfortunately, that really are having difficulty because they haven't been exposed to good, solid research-based instruction. So we need to have a really good understanding of what that history is. because that helps create the picture of you know, what we need to do for that child. And then you also want to make sure that the evaluator is going to provide very specific recommendations so that you really have a blueprint as to, you know, how to address these areas of need for the child.
Thank you very much. Megan, I'm going to turn to you. So, you know, when we were talking a couple of days ago, we were talking a little bit about fidelity.
Mhm.
And when I think of fidelity in a program that's being delivered, I think of the quality of the qualifications of the teacher and the service hours and the length of the, you know, the program and things like that. And we were kind of talking a little bit how fidelity in a private school environment might have a little bit of a different definition. So I'm wondering if you could kind of delve into that a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think some of the things that we hear from parents are, you know, are they being taught by a Wilson certified teacher, or, you know, very highly focusing on that certification and teaching a program to fidelity. And I think that's what a lot of parents are looking for, right? Because that's what they're hearing that they need. But I think a program or an approach is only as effective as the educator in the room. So the approach has to have some type of flexible fidelity in order, kind of like what Kristen was saying. I had the 5 pieces of the pillars of the National Reading Panel in my notes as well. So I think having a lesson that teaches all 5 parts is more important than focusing on that specific program. So it has to be multisensory and it has to be based on the science of reading. So I think any reading program or approach that you're using has to have those 2 key components. Students with dyslexia, the multisensory piece is so important. And it really is such a buzzword now, but there is so much data and science behind it. So, you know, the weaknesses come from students' ability to connect the vision and the language skills in the brain. So kids with dyslexia are using those 2 parts of the brain in isolation and aren't connecting the 2. So without the multisensory approach, you'll see a lot of kids compensating for those weaknesses, and they might rely solely on memorizing words or their verbal expression rather than strengthening the pathways. So really making sure that we're not just saying it's multisensory and it's actually being done in the classroom. Also, that it's based on the science of reading. So all 5 components, the phonemic awareness, phonics, vocabulary, fluency, and comprehension, all of those pieces must be instructed. So a lot of the reading programs that are taught to fidelity and taught exactly the way that the program runs, you know, a student might have to start at a certain level, but that might not be where the student needs to start. So kind of understanding that there is a continuum within each of these 5 parts of the pillar. So phonemic awareness, there's skills that are the basic skills that go all the way to complex, and those are for each of the 5 parts. So just making sure that, you know, whatever program or whatever approach is being used is addressing all 5 of those pieces and is starting at the most simple concept and is building to the most complex. What can we teach the kid that is going to get them reading and succeeding inside of school and outside of school? So I really do think that it's more important to make sure that each reading lesson and that the program and approach that is being used in the classroom is taught to fidelity rather than a program being taught to fidelity. So the lesson should be hitting all 5 parts. One of the benefits of Eagle Hill is that we have a reading class, but that the vocabulary is being done in their history class. You know, we have that kind of reading approach throughout each of their classes. So I think that really is a benefit that we have those 5 pillars that are being used throughout the day in a variety of lessons. And I think that that is more important than kind of thinking about a fidelity of a specific program, flexible fidelity.
And that's assuming that the teacher has the training
Correct.
to
Yeah,
be flexible with that. So that may
correct.
be happening in some of the private schools, but it's a little less likely to be happening in some of the public schools.
Correct.
It's not
Um,
happening in some private schools either.
It's true.
So,
And
yeah.
and yeah, and that's kind of my caveat, right? Is that you're only as effective as the educator or the program within the school that is being used. So I'd say, we use more of an approach, right? We have scope and sequences. We know, where a kid should start and where a kid should end, but kind of where we start a kid is based on what that student and that class needs rather than, oh, this student maxed out on this list and now we have to start them at a certain step. That's not focusing on the whole child and all of the pieces that go into dyslexia. It's usually just focusing on the decoding.
And where does spelling and writing come in with those 5 pillars? Does that fall within that? Because it doesn't logically seem like it does.
It falls in all different parts. So, the phonics piece, you are going to be doing dictation, you're going to be doing spelling while you're reading. So that's that multisensory piece. You are always, when you're writing, you are always saying the sounds as you're reading. You're really doing that multisensory piece in all parts of the science of reading. So that's kind of where the spelling comes in, that tactile piece. That's where those pieces come in. They're literally built into all 5 parts.
Okay. Because I think that's not always known, right? Those pieces kind of slip away. I'm going to turn back to our advocate and attorney. And, we've heard a little bit about what goes into a good evaluation. We've heard about what goes into a good program or approach. What are the biggest deficits in these best practices that you see with your client base? Jeff, can we start with you?
Sure. Yeah. So the fidelity and the implementation of the program, the data or lack thereof that either shows or does not show progress is often an issue. Just from the audience perspective, right? So often when you get an advocate or an attorney involved, you know that something's not working with the methodology that the school and the special education teacher are using to close the gap in your child's reading deficits, right? But you don't necessarily know what questions to ask, and you don't know what is beyond the IEP. And one thing that you really want to find out is what are they using to measure progress, and what is the literacy methodology that they're using. For example, in the case that went to hearing recently that I did, there was a student that was using the Sunday system as their literacy methodology, and they used it for years. I'm not just talking, a couple semesters, but years. And the child did not respond well to it, was not making progress. So it was the district's obligation to pivot and try other programs, but they refused to, right? Diane, why don't you add in here?
Yeah,
So much to say, right? So
no, that's okay. I can do the same thing because I get excited about it.
yeah.
Yeah, I think the biggest hurdle is the training and preparation and lack of supervised practicum of the teacher. Kristen, you are not alone among special ed teachers who had one course in reading. And that continues to be true. Our schools of education have dropped the ball and have not adequately prepared our teachers to teach anyone to read, let alone a child with dyslexia. And that is not just Connecticut. This is a nationwide problem. So to me, that's often what I'm looking for. I almost don't care if they're using a program or an approach or whatever. If I've got somebody who is certified in structured literacy, who has that in-depth training, in-depth supervised practicum, remember those words. I feel like, they might be able to do Sunday and modify it for the way the child needs. I don't know. Sometimes Orton Gillingham doesn't work because there's not enough focus on the phonemic awareness and the phonemic proficiency. So you can add that. There are just different things that you can do. So yeah, that's the biggest piece. I agree with Jeff about data collection. That's essential. And I ask my families to ask that they get weekly or biweekly data, and using Dibbles or something similar that, it takes literally a minute to do to see if the child's making progress. And then the assessments that are done to determine if the child needs reading instruction, specialized reading instruction, are often not done well. Very many districts use sort of general achievement measure, either the Willcutts-Johnson, the Wechsler, WIAT, or the KTA. And those are all just general achievement tests. And then say, oh, the student got an average score. But then I look at it and say, oh yeah, but you didn't do the subtest where they're decoding nonsense words, or you didn't look at oral reading fluency, or you didn't look at phonemic proficiency, which there isn't, a real good standardized test. I'm usually asking for an informal measure. School staff should be able to do this on their own. Sometimes people will say, well, what test should I request? I don't ever recommend asking for particular tests. The ones that I like to see are the Comprehensive Test of Phonological Processing, or the CTOP. I like to see the WIST. I like to see the TOWER, the Test of Word Reading Efficiency. I like to see the Gray Oral Reading Test. And I'm sure there are other favorites that people have. And then I love the informal measures because they tell me exactly where is that student and what are their needs in regards to instruction. So so there are big, big problems. And so if your district staff are telling you, don't worry, let's monitor this, but your gut instinct is something's not right here, full speed ahead, because it's not going to hurt your child to get assessed. And it'll give you more information about where's the child at? And then if the school evaluation wasn't sufficient, if you disagree with it, I'm sure we'll get to this, you need to ask the district to pay for an independent evaluation with someone you choose that they pay for. I guess I'll stop talking now because I could do this all night.
I think
add one more thing to that too, Laura. Just
sure.
One more thing, because we're going to get to IEs, I know too. But to add on what Diane is saying too, if you've gone through all that, right? So parents, like if you've gone through all that, sometimes you don't need more evaluations or assessments of the child. You need, I'll call it an evaluation and assessment of the program. And that is where someone like Kristen Viesselman can come in, or another equivalent literacy educational specialist can come in and partner with the district to evaluate the actual literacy program. So you're not necessarily asking, moms and dads, you listen here, you're not actually asking for an additional evaluation of your child. You're asking for an outside literacy specialist to come in to determine if the program is benefiting your child. And someone like Kristen can come in and make recommendations on how to pivot to a different methodology or a smaller group or a different level, right? And that can solve everything. So sometimes it's not necessarily an assessment, it's a programmatic review.
That's a
Thank
great
you, Jeff.
point, Jeff.
And I think that, we're sitting in this discussion on progress, because to me, this is the most important thing for a parent to take away is my child making progress? And how do I know that? And so, Kristen, I want to turn to you a little bit to see, what does progress look like? Because a district may say your child is making progress. They had 3 out of 16 and now they have 8 out of 16, and that's progress, right? So, but the parents are seeing them move further behind their peers. So how do you reconcile that progress, and what makes progress meaningful in these kids?
Yeah, I think that's something that many districts struggle with. And I think many professionals are still struggling with that as well. There's no easy answer to that, but if you've ever seen one of my evaluations, I do try to develop a really specific progress monitoring plan for the child so that when you're meeting, you can have meaningful conversations about their progress or lack of. So you really do need access to data. So there is that type of data that you were just talking about, things like, okay, we've been working on Shorty. They knew 2 out of 10. Now they know 8 out of 10. But I, as a parent, still don't have a sense of where they are, just because they've mastered short A. And so, yes, we need that type of data. But we also need those growth outcome measures. So we need the progress monitoring probes from, Dibbles or a Cadence, so that we're giving them these quick but frequent measures to make sure that that they're responding to the program and we're seeing a positive trend in their responsiveness, and that we're not seeing the gap widening. But it's also important that they're choosing the right measures. For example, if we have a child that's reading that's in the 5th grade, but they're reading at a 1st grade level, we don't want to choose 4th grade progress monitoring probes for that child, because it will be very difficult to close that gap. And we need to start with, if they're reading at about a 1st grade level, perhaps 2nd grade level probes to show that responsiveness. So, and then the last piece there is also looking at very formal assessments. So Diane was mentioning assessments like the Gray Oral Reading Test or the Word Identification and Spelling Test. Some of those tests have alternate forms so that you can actually give them with more frequency, or at the very least, if they don't have those alternate forms, you can give those on an annual basis. And standard scores and scaled scores are a really important measure to really see, is the gap getting wider? So are the standard scores decreasing, or are we starting to close that gap and we're seeing an increase in those standard scores? So I really think you need to look at it through all of those different types of assessments to really assess whether or not progress is happening for that child.
Thank you. Megan, I'm going to turn to you for a question. So, we have some of these kids that are coming out of public schools, potentially years behind their peers. When you're looking at a child at Eagle Hill, how can you determine whether that child with this intensive instruction and immersive instruction will be able to make meaningful progress?
Yeah, so before coming, it's an academic program that has that whole child approach. So the goal is to give students strategies to be able to succeed outside of Eagle Hill and in the real world. So our admissions team has an in-depth process that includes a lot of the things that you guys were just talking about, right? They're looking at all of those student files, all of those testing scores. They're having conversations with the parents. They're getting teacher recommendations. The student is coming in and shadowing Eagle Hill before they come. So once our admissions team says, this is a great fit, once a student's here, I think this is something that we've had and struggled with, having a population of all students with language-based learning disabilities, is that the assessments that are being given are created for typical learning students. So we've found it's difficult to find an assessment that accurately shows the progress that we're seeing informally within the classroom. And how do we show that progress how do we put that in a test? So what we're piloting this year is actually Track My Progress, which was developed for kids with learning disabilities. So we're piloting that this year. We also do use the CBMs, the curriculum-based measures. And one of the things that I like that we do is that we're assessing each separate part. So kind of, we talked about those 5 pillars of reading, but we're assessing the fluency. But a student could have a fluency at their grade level. They could be in 7th grade and reading fluently, but their comprehension could be on the longer proficient reading passage, their proficient reading could be at like a second grade level, right? And so those are very important conversations. A kid is more than just a number. So kind of what Kristen was saying, we have to have those numbers and then explain it to a parent. Part of that is the conversation of, it's hard looking at numbers, but it is a lot easier to explain what is happening and why those numbers are coming up and which numbers are showing progress. It might not look like lightning progress, right? But some progress is progress. And making sure that that progress is in the area where the deficits are. So if fluency is something that a student is doing really well in, we need to then attack the comprehension piece. So making sure that we are tracking, the skills that students really, really are struggling with. And hopefully we're hoping that this Track My Progress, we've heard really great things, is going to be a good kind of measure for us to use.
Thank you very much.
But it's difficult.
Yeah. So I'm going to turn back to our advocate and attorney, and parents are finding you because things aren't going well, right? We don't deal in the happy parents, and a lot of times they're coming in angry because there's harm caused here. In your experiences, how can districts reduce this adversarial conflict and instead build processes that ensure compliance while fostering trust with families, which isn't an easy question or a quick question, but I think it's an important question.
I think the most important thing districts can do is to be transparent with families. Make sure that families get copies of whatever scores, whatever data exist. With the tiered intervention, parents are supposed to be receiving the progress monitoring data. Very often they're seeing it for the first time at a PPT where they're referring to eligibility. So I would say being transparent is number one. If there's a problem, say the teacher's going to be out for 3 weeks or something, the reading teacher and their child's not going to be getting services, they need to tell the parent. They need to not sweep that under the rug and hope the child doesn't mention it or whatever, because districts are worried about not being in compliance. However, the child needs the instruction. This is supposed to be about the child, not about the district. Certainly, in some cases, districts need to be prepared to bring in outside consultants. The vast majority of teachers, special ed teachers, even reading specialists in Connecticut do not have any kind of background in structured literacy that's consistent with reading science. They don't have that supervised practicum. And so we need, more people are getting trained, but I've been in districts where they say, we don't have anybody. And, a lot of districts, it might be 1 or 2 people. And so they need to focus on the needs of the child and say, yep, we're working on it. We're getting our teachers trained and we're doing the supervised practicum. But right now we're not ready to hit the ground running for this child. So we're going to bring in someone who already has that background. And I think that would go a long way to helping restore positive relationships with families.
Thank you, Diane. Jeff, do you have anything you want to add to that?
Well, I really, Diane covered everything there. I think that there is a component to what's called compensatory education. So for services that have not been rendered just by sheer service hours or by service hours that were rendered but were not rendered appropriately, either or, take your pick, right, can potentially amount to compensatory education. And whether that comp ed is delivered and serviced through a in-district provider or an outside provider are things that can be negotiated. And if the gap in achievement to grade level is just so profoundly far off, and the skill acquisition rate is de minimis at best with districts programming, and you can close that gap faster with a more structured, specialized, literacy-based private school, you may have to go to mediation or due process. Now, if you go to due process, it's not for the faint at heart. There is a 2-prong analysis in which the district has to prove that their program was appropriate, And if the program is proved appropriate, you don't get to prong two, which is the program that the child wants to go to or is unilaterally placed at, is that program appropriate? And then you have to put on your burden of proof to show that it is. And some private schools will not necessarily testify at a due process hearing as to prong two. So, you have to read the decisions on this, and you certainly don't want to go it alone. But that's on the far litigious end. I really like what Diane said, and I often will do this more than anything, is if you really want to be collaborative with your school team and you want to get it right, bring in a consultant and ask for a bank of consultation hours, either direct or indirect, on your child's IEP, so that someone is making sure that it's being done with fidelity. One thing that often amazes me, and then I'll get off the bandwagon here, is you have a child that is significantly below grade level, but on the IEP progress monitoring frequency, it says that the child's progress monitoring on closing the gap is consistent with, when report cards are given out.
Yeah, quarterly.
And, you don't want to benchmark a child that is so far behind with one that is neurotypical against, report card progress monitoring. You want it, as Diane said, bi-weekly, monthly. You want progress monitoring schedules, right?
Yeah.
Those are things that you're not going to know unless you speak with an advocate or someone like Kristen or an attorney, right? Or a private school. You won't know these things unless you listen to these seminars, which is why they're so great that you're doing them.
Thank you. So I've got one more question for our, advocate and attorney, and then we have some questions from the participants that are probably better suited to Megan and Kristen. If there was, I'm going to limit you to one each. If there was a policy change at the state or local level that would most improve outcomes for students with dyslexia, what would be your wish?
I've got one. Yes, I want the state to require that all of our educator preparation programs and requirement for teacher certification, I want them to say, you cannot become a certified special ed teacher, a certified reading specialist, or a certified K-3 teacher unless you have completed a program of study and supervised practicum in structured literacy. This would help all students. Meg and Kristen were saying structured literacy is great for all students, and most of them need it, which is why only 36% of Connecticut fourth graders are proficient in reading. So that's my wish.
Thank you. Jeff, your wish?
Do I only get one, Laura?
You only get one. I'm sorry. We're almost at the end and we have questions from our audience.
Well, I guess if I only had one, it would be that each district hire a dyslexia specialist within each district, right? We would have so much more interventions if we had that. And because that's not something that I think is going to be a reality, that's why I'm urging parents to hire or convince your district to hire someone in the equivalent of Kristen's position to come in and look at the program.
Thank you. So we have a few more minutes. We're going to try and take some questions. So while to the extent you can answer the question and keep it brief, we can get to as many questions as we can. The first one I'm going to direct to Kristen. So it's a question regarding how do you test for dysgraphia, not dyslexia? And I think you can include dyscalculia in there while you're at it to just, how do those three kind of fit together when you're evaluating, and who would be responsible for evaluation of those issues?
Yeah. So within the school, it would, okay. So with dysgraphia, it's a little tricky because it really falls under the umbrella of a written expression disorder. They don't have it listed as an option for primary disability. And so, but it's still important to recognize if a student has symptoms of dysgraphia. And so that should occur, I think, during your evaluation. So that's going to be the evaluation with the special education teacher, if that's taking place in the school setting, or that's going to be with your outside educational evaluator. But sometimes an occupational therapist may be involved in that as well. But again, they typically will not use that as a quote unquote diagnosis, but they may say that they have those symptoms. As far as looking at the math piece, that also is going to be your special education teacher. And again, they're probably not going to use that specific language. They'll say there's a learning disability in the area of math. If you're looking for a specific diagnosis along those lines, you would probably need to see a clinical or a neuropsychologist to get that specific diagnosis.
Thank you. We've got a question. Is it legal for a paraeducator to be implementing a reading intervention program, or should it be a credentialed teacher? Jeff or Diane, you want to take a shot at that one?
Paraprofessionals can implement anything, pretty much. However, whether it's a certified teacher or paraprofessional, neither one of those are necessarily qualified to implement structured literacy. So it's like a lot of times we'll say, oh, it's the special ed teacher. Oh, yay, we're happy. And it's like, but the special ed teacher has no background in structured literacy instruction anyway. So, so the answer, and I'm sure Jeff will correct me if I've got this wrong because he's an attorney, but no, there's no legal prohibition on paras delivering instruction as long as they're overseen by certified staff who are introducing the instruction.
That's exactly right. I mean, Diane can be an attorney, okay, folks. So, but not only that, but there's this new change to IEPs where service implementers aren't even going to be listed on the IEPs, which makes it even more frustrating. To be that's on the horizon here, but. Yeah, I mean, if you have a child that's not learning and the gap is not closing and the service implementer is special ed teacher / paraprofessional, that's a problem because both of either or can be the implementer of that service grid, of that goal and objective. And you'd be amazed, the stories that we can tell about where special ed teachers are not delivering the service. But to Diane's point, even if they were, they credentialed to do it in the first place.
Thank you. So we've got a question. I'm going to open it to the panel and see who wants to take this one. I find it challenging to get the school and I on the same page for goals. I want to close the gap between my child and her same grade peers, but they are satisfied with her simply making growth year over year. Is there legal language that services should be aimed at closing the gap, not just forward progress? Diane, I see you shaking your head, so go for it.
I'm so excited. Yes, I'll leave Andrew F to Jeff to talk about and the ambitious goals. But there is also guidance from the U.S. Department of Ed that if you email Christine, I will send it to whoever wants it. It's guidance from the U.S. Department of Ed that basically says that for students who are behind grade level, the expectation is that we will program to help them close the gap. And it says we will not necessarily expect them to close the gap within a year, but that they should be making more than a year's progress in a year's time. Now, that's not going to apply to every single child, but it should apply to the vast majority of kids. Because the vast majority of kids, if they're getting an appropriate program, that's a big if, but if they're getting an appropriate program, should be able to achieve on grade level standards. So that's my spiel on that.
And Jeff, if you want to quickly summarize the U.S. Supreme Court decision.
Okay, so if you want a really long version of Andrew F., I do have a podcast. It's called Let's Talk Sped Law. No, this is not a plug for it, and because it's free and everything, but there is an episode specifically on Andrew F. I like to summarize it in one sentence by the acronym FAPE, F-A-P-E. Think of it with two A's. So it's FAPE, and instead of it being free appropriate public education, it's free ambitiously appropriate public education. So it's a double A. Historically, FAPE was simply access to education with minimal progress, but the double A makes it now ambitious. And there's actually a template, maybe you might have it, Diane. I think it's on understood.org, where there is a template where you can use the language of Andrew F. in developing ambitious goals and objectives. If I can dig it up before we leave, I'll put it in the chat here, but I often find that to be a useful resource for parents.
Thank you. This looks like a quick question, and then we've got one more, and then we've got to wrap up. Are there other programs like Linda Mood Bell Learning Centers to help students with reading? If so, how can I find a list of these experts in California? Does anybody have any information? I mean, I know that there's lists of Orton Gillingham certified providers and Wilson certified providers that you can get from those particular organizations. I don't know if anyone has any other information on that, but I don't know of any other resource or specifically to California.
No,
And
that's
I don't see anybody.
exactly what I would be thinking.
Yeah, okay. And our final question, can you speak to reading the results of an evaluation like a CTOP? It feels like the percentage ranking for average is wide. Kristen, do you want to quickly speak to that?
Sure. I mean, I think that it's really important to understand that the test publishers have their own descriptors for tests as to what language they want to use to describe average or below average or low average. And those descriptors can vary depending on what the test is. You're absolutely right in saying there's a wide, if you take the CTOP, for example, the 25th to the 75th percentile is considered within average range according to their descriptors on that particular assessment. Just picture that bell-shaped curve. And if your child is cognitively at the smack dab in the middle, then performing within that 25th to 75th is probably very appropriate for them. But if you have a child that is performing way above, where they're performing cognitively in, the 92nd percentile, but they get a score like the 25th percentile on the CTOP, that's a much more substantial, significant gap that they have. So it's really important to not just look at the test scores, but to look at the whole learning profile for that child to see if they are within an appropriate range. But you're right to think that that is a wide range. Very roughly speaking, it's about 25th is like about a year below and 75th is about a year above, just to give you a general sense.
Thank you. So unfortunately, we have to wrap things up. We went a little over, but I'm so glad that we got to some of the questions. I want to sincerely thank all of our expert panelists. I think there was a lot of information conveyed. If your brain is full, it is recorded. It will be posted on our website probably sometime tomorrow if you need to rewatch or re-listen to anything.
It'll be on Facebook tomorrow. It'll
be on Facebook tomorrow, yes.
Not be on the website.
Oh, I'm sorry, Facebook tomorrow.
Sorry.
But yes, thank you very much to our corporate sponsors. Thank you very much to our panelists. I want to let everyone know that next month on October 8th, we will be doing a webinar that is called The School Year is Not Going Well. And another great topic where you're kind of sort of into the school year and suddenly you're realizing things are not going well. And we've got a great panel of experts to talk about that and hopefully provide some answers for you. And other than that, I just want to thank you for being here for my first moderated webinar. I look forward to many more, and I hope to see many of you again soon. And thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Good night.